So it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Johanna Oosterwyk. She's going to talk to us about choosing the best plants for your indoor space. Take it away.
Good morning. Let me just set up my PowerPoint to give some color to what I'm going to say this morning. It's great to be here with you, Julie. So I am the greenhouse manager at the University of Wisconsin-Madison campus, and I manage the instructional greenhouses for the College of Agriculture and teach classes in greenhouse management and houseplant ID and houseplant care. So this is where I get to work every day, right on the UW campus. And I guess I'll point out we are open weekdays if folks want ever on in Madison and want to stop by. But we want to talk about houseplants and how do we choose the best ones. So the first thing to look at is, well, what do they want? What do they need from us to really do well? So first question I have is, what do houseplants want? And most of our houseplants come from the tropics and the subtropics, areas that are warm all year round. So they're going to want warm temperatures, but they also tend to come from low light areas, from rainforest canopy, subcanopy, well, where the light conditions are low. Light in our homes is much reduced from the light we get outside. So most houseplants are already sort of pre-selected for us. They're ones that want warm temperatures year round. We keep our houses warm in the winter. And the light conditions are lower than they would be outside. These are also plants that tend to stay evergreen, so they keep their leaves year round, unlike our temperate temperate plants here in Wisconsin. It's very windy outside today, so we're getting all of those leaves being whipped off the trees after a nice week of good fall color, I thought. So to choose the right plant, you need to think about two things, to my mind. Know your space. Know enough about your house to match what the plant needs as far as light and temperatures and water. The other thing to know is your habits. You're the one who's going to be caring for this plant. So know enough about yourself to choose a plant that will match well with your habits and how you go about interacting with your space and interacting with your plants. Or, as it says, be prepared to make changes. Are you open to purchasing some lights, spending the money on extra light so the plants can have their energy? Are you open to changing your habits a little bit in order to make a certain plant that you really find attractive work for you? As I said, know your behavior, and I include this picture because obviously the plants in the background there are in danger from the other inhabitants of my house. So behavior is really important. But in indoor plants, light is going to be the critical factor. It's really what we call the most limiting factor. Plants use light as energy, and if they don't have enough light, they're not going to thrive. So plants that need more light for producing flowers, producing fruit, producing colorful leaves may not work in homes that don't have enough light. So the first thing to know is, how much light do you have available? Which kind of plants can you support? And know your habits. As I said, are you willing to add more lights? Do you have good southern exposure and a clear view to the sun, but you prefer to keep the curtains shut? So think about things like that. Do you go away for a long time, leave the curtains shut? Your plants are going to suffer from not having enough energy. How do you know the light that you have? How can you tell? And most of you actually have a light sensor probably very close to hand, either in your pocket or within arm's reach if you're like me. If your phone has a camera, it also has a light sensor. That's how your phone knows to raise or lower the brightness of the screen, or how to take those great pictures without any difficulty. So your phone already has a light sensor. To get the readings from that light sensor, you can use a light meter app. So this is an additional app you would get from the App Store. Download that. They're usually marketed to photographers, but use that to measure the light in your space. Now, light levels change throughout the day, so it's best to take several readings on a clear day when there's no cloud cover. So on a clear day, take a couple of readings, morning, afternoon, evening, and take those readings wherever you are planning to put your plants, because different spaces in your home will have more or less light. But take a couple of readings and then average those. And using that average, you can guide what kind of plants will work in that space. So what kind of plants your space is correct for. In general, low light, I look at about 50 to 100 foot candles. And there are two units that your light meter will offer you. One is foot candles and one is lux. I use foot candles because a lot of the older references for houseplants are also written in foot candles. So low light, if your reading average gives you about 50 to 100, that's a really low light plants, and it's going to limit the kind of plants that you can grow. Medium light, more than that, 100 to 250 foot candles. High light, 250 to 700 foot candles or above. You can probably grow most plants. And in general, low light plants will do better in medium light plants will do better in high light. But high light plants really will not be happy with less light. So what kind of plants like low light? As I said, where in your house you put your plants is going to affect how much light they have. So a north-facing window, say, if it's unshaded, it's going to have low light, 50 to 100 foot candles. And plants that can do well in low light usually have large green light leaves, but they don't have very many flowers. Flowers take more energy for the plant to produce. So you would need more energy. You would need higher light than these plants can take. And these are some of our most common houseplants: philodendron and pothos, the ZZ plant, dracaena and snake plant. There are a reason they're so popular. They can handle relatively low amounts of light. What we might think of as bright reading light, oh, there's plenty of light in here, can be really limiting for what plants need. Medium light, you're looking at probably like an east window, where it might get bright light in the morning, but lower light in the sun. Like I said, take an average of different times of day, how much light you get in to your growing space. Plants that like medium light can include peperomia, ferns, some flowering plants like African violet and begonia. But for the most part, you're looking again at plants with large green leaves that have a lot of surface area and can catch the energy from the light that they do get. If you have a little bit more light, say a south or a west window or a really big bay window, you might look at some of our highlight plants. Things like croton, Hawaiian tea, these often have colorful leaves and usually have flowers, but they need more light to sustain that. Very high light plants, either an extremely large south-facing window that has no shade from trees, or if you want to invest in it, an additional grow light, you can grow cactus, hibiscus, and possibly, if you have enough light, plants like citrus that not only give you flowers, but I'm sure you're hoping for fruit. But flowers and fruit need a lot of energy. And for plants, that means light. The next thing to consider is temperature. What is your space like? Do you have central air where hot, dry air comes from vents? That can dry out plants. The heat and the dryness of the air can make plants that are used to a lush tropical rainforest environment really struggle. You also want to avoid cold draft. So putting a plant too close to a doorway where it gets a blast of cold air can also cause the plant to struggle. So know your habits. Know your thermostat settings. Do you set the temperature back when you're not at home? Below about 60 degrees is going to mean a struggle for a lot of our common houseplants. So tropical plants, as I said, they're used to that lush rainforest, and they can be sensitive to cold drafts, less than 60 or 55 degrees. They can also be sensitive to cold water. I've listed the African violet here. It does not like cold temperatures, and if you water it with cold water straight from the tap, which is usually about 55 degrees, you will often see the results. You can get brown spots because the even 55-degree water is cold enough to cause chilling injury on African violet leaves. So tip for your African violets, let the water sit out and water them with room temperature water, not cold water straight out of the sink. On the other hand, there are some plants that enjoy cool night temperatures. I leave my holiday cactus, those Christmas and Thanksgiving and Easter cactuses, they bloom so beautifully for us, and I get mine to flower even better by giving them some cool night temperatures. I actually take my holiday cactus outside for the summer, and I don't bring them in until it gets into the 40s at night. That cold temperature helps to encourage them to notice the change in the seasons. And the cool temperatures at night will allow them or encourage them to flower. Same with Rabutia cactus, amaryllis, and cyclamen. Cool night temperatures are healthy for these plants and will encourage them to flower because of the way that it mimics the change in the seasons. But these are also plants that don't come from hot tropical rainforests. They come from more moderate subtropical areas of the world. Final thing to consider when you're thinking about your space, what kind of water are you using? Are you going to take water, as I said, straight out of the tap, or are you willing to adjust it a little bit? Many plants are sensitive to the things that are added to our city water. Now, we put chlorine and fluoride in our city water to make it more healthy for people. We want to kill off any bacteria or microorganisms that are in the water, so it's healthy to drink. But the chlorine that is used to do that can harm some plants. So there's a picture here of a spider plant, and these brown streaks along the margin are the result of chlorine and fluoride that are added to the city water here in Madison. So some other plants that are sensitive, spider plant, as I showed you in that picture, but also Dracaena, orchids, and calathea. And you'll see dead or brown patches along the edge of the leaf margin. How do you fix that? Well, are you willing to use filtered water or reverse osmosis water? Use those instead of your tap water. Or if you are on a well, depending on the water quality of your well water, and I'm sure if you're on a well, you have to get it tested. Think about what's in the water besides H2O. Next, we talk about habits. What is your watering style? So the right amount of water. Do you forget to water? This is my behavior. I wait until my plants tell me that they need water. Would you prefer to have a schedule and make it part of your weekly routine? How you are prepared to provide water to the plants, your watering habits, are going to impact how your plants survive. I'm just going to recommend one plant here, the peace lily, which you see a picture of there. This plant will tell you when it needs water. I really appreciate that about this plant. It's obviously sitting there going, "Would you water me already?" Yelling at you from across the room. But it can recover from wilting. There are other plants like Fittonia that you cannot allow to dry out. On the other hand, it's really hard to overwater a peace lily. I know folks who grow these in fish tanks. So they don't mind having their roots wet all the time, which is a problem for most plants. And they will also tell you when they are underwatered. So in my case, that's a win-win. And this plant is very vocal about when it needs to be watered, but it will also recover from that wilting. So that's setting up the correct environment, but we also want to consider our plants. How do we choose a healthy plant? So you go to the garden center or the store and you see a whole range of plants available for you. Which one do you take home? Well, avoid bringing yourself any other headaches in the form of pests or diseases. So pests tend to be very, very small. Many of them are insects or mites, and they may not be obvious, but there are other things you can look for. Avoid plants that have a blotchy or distorted leaf if that's not the way the plant is supposed to look like. So you can see in the right side of this picture, this leaf has some yellow spots on it. This leaf is supposed to be a solid, rich green. Those spots are caused by the insects that are actually on the underside of the leaf. So in the middle of the picture, you see the back side of the leaf. On the top of the leaf, you'll just see those yellow blotches. But those are mealybugs, and you don't want to bring those into your home because they'll spread to all your other houseplants. So avoid sick-looking plants with a blotchy or distorted leaf. Avoid plants with a sticky residue on them, sort of a sticky clear syrup. That's honeydew, and it can be the droppings from some other insects like aphids, whiteflies, or scale. Avoid plants with chewing injury or plants where you maybe see the shed skins of some of these other insects. Avoid plants with disease symptoms. So you want healthy stems, leaves, and roots. Unhealthy plant tissues might be slimy or smelly. You can see these roots here, the ones on the left are white and firm and thick. The ones on the right have root rot. And the roots are struggling probably because the plant was overwatered. So look for plants that are healthy, that have thick, firm tissues, not slimy or smelly. And yellowing from the base of a plant can indicate root or crown rot. So if the roots look like the ones on the right, all brown and dying, you'll see that in the upper part of the plant where the stems and the leaves start to turn yellow from the bottom up. And that can be a sign of overwatering. And a plant that's maybe not as healthy as another one you might like. What do you look for? Look for plants that have new growth on them, that are starting to spread out new leaves, new flower buds. It shows that they're actively growing, that they have enough nutrients, they have had enough energy and light and the right kind of water and temperatures to make them grow well. So look for plants that have a little bit of new growth on them. New growth that is a vibrant green, not pale. And avoid plants that are really heavily root bound, so they look like they're about to bust out of their pot, unless you're ready to repot that right away yourself. Or avoid plants that have just been repotted, that have looked like they've just been stuck in a pot that's too big for them and the roots have not spread out through much of the soil. So those are the things that I recommend that you look for, but I'm happy to take your questions now and answer as many of those as I can get to.
Thank you so much. Yes, we do have some questions coming in, so I'll remind everybody to use that Q&A feature to ask your questions, and we'll try to talk some more about some specific houseplants that people have questions about. I know that somebody did ask about plants and their pets, so I'm going to put a link into the chat here about that has a list from the ASPCA about toxic houseplants, right? That some could be toxic to your cats or dogs. Is that right?
Yeah, so I find that the reference I go to the most often, if folks are worried that a particular houseplant might be toxic to their pets, the ASPCA has a really nice searchable database. You can just type in the name of the plant that you're looking for, and it'll pop up with information about whether or not it might be toxic to your pets.
Perfect. Okay, let's see. You mentioned when we are using city water, a lot of times it has chlorine and fluoride in it. And I've heard this too, and the question asks, will chlorine evaporate off if the tap water sits for a day?
Yes, for the most part, you can degas it like you would for a fish tank.
Okay, great. Let's see. Another question is, can you suggest companion plants for a large alocasia plant that I brought in for the winter?
Okay. So those alocasia plants, if it is doing well, I mean, it's got big lush leaves, so you might look for something that has a little more color, or something that has some flowers, like those African violets. You could also look at some of other plants in that family, like the peace lily or an anthurium. So you'd mimic that same kind of leaf shape and structure, but add some pops of color with plants like those. Or you could go the other direction and look for things that have maybe a more fine grass-like texture, just to give you some contrast, something like a ponytail palm or a spider plant, which has more thin grass-like leaves and where you can just get some contrast. So it really depends on what you're looking for. But I guess those would be my first suggestions.
Great. Let's see here. I'm going to go to the hens and chicks question. So I'll read it off to you. I have a single hens and chicks. It went unwatered for a time in the summer, and so it developed a large section at its base, about 5 inches tall, that is completely brown. The top of the plant, about 3 inches tall, is fine and is normal green. Can they cut off the healthy top section and repot it? They don't want to kill it because it has some sentimental value.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is a good idea. So that top section, I would probably keep like an inch of the stem below it, just so you can use that to kind of stick it and secure it into your new potting mix. But you should certainly be able to take that top uh, hen and chick and bring that down to your potting mix and it will start to root in. But I'd keep a little bit of stem just to help secure it into its new home. But
Great,
definitely that's a plant you can do that with.
great. And you can keep it going then. Keep it going. Here's a question about gardenia. It just seems weak. Some leaves are yellowish. Blooming has been very limited. Is this a plant that can grow indoors? And if so, how can I best take care of it?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't have a lot of experience with gardenia. If you haven't fertilized it recently, that can be one source of yellow leaves. If you've just brought it in from outside, you might need to add some light. But those would be kind of my first two things to look at. But unfortunately, I have not grown gardenia myself. But yellowing leaves this time of year, if you've brought it in from outside, give it more light because that's going to be the biggest issue. And also think about fertilizing it. If you have not tried to use a fertilizer before, it could be needing some nutrition.
And that is a good question about fertilizer. So somebody asked about their hibiscus and they repot into separate pots. They're growing, but no flowers. So they asked about what kind of fertilizer could I use, but maybe you could also just kind of comment generally on fertilizer for our indoor plants.
Sure. We use kind of a general purpose fertilizer, but one thing to know about fertilizers, so on every fertilizer label, there's 3 numbers, and those 3 numbers are always in the same order for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, N, P, and K. And if you're growing a leafy plant, you want more nitrogen. Nitrogen is one of the things that makes plants leafy and green. If you have a plant that is flowering or fruiting, though, those second 2 numbers are going to be more important, the phosphorus and potassium. So if you have a foliage plant that is leafy and green, you're going to want one with a higher N number and lower P and K numbers. If you want to encourage flowers, though, you're going to want a fertilizer where those 3 numbers are the same or maybe a little bit higher in the potassium and phosphorus. So maybe the 2 last numbers are a little higher than the first number.
Great. And we're kind of had several watering questions. So I'm going to go back to that about watering. One is, will fluoride evaporate if the tap water sits out? We talked about
Yeah.
chlorine, but fluoride too?
Fluoride will not. So unlike chlorine, the fluoride will not leave the water. So that's going to still be there.
Okay, good to know.
Mhm.
What about distilled water? Could we use distilled water for
You could
watering?
certainly use distilled water. It's going to be expensive, but if you have very sensitive plants like dracaenas or that spider plant I showed you, you'll see a difference.
There we go. So a lot going back to that, what you choose to grow too. So if you
Mhm.
have some really sensitive plants, you might reconsider what you're trying to grow there. And what about aquarium water? Can that benefit plants?
Aquarium water can benefit plants, especially because it has some fertility in it. It's got some of that nitrogen from the fish waste. We've just started growing plants in an aquaponic system where we have a large fish tank, and that fish tank water is basically used as a hydroponic solution to grow the plants in. And the main thing we're looking for is to cut our fertilizer costs by using that fish tank water.
Great. And then some people might have collecting rainwater. So they're maybe have a rainwater barrel outside. Is
Mhm.
that okay for houseplants too?
We're a little bit hesitant to recommend that because depending on the source of your rainwater, it can pick up other things. So unless you're very certain that the rainwater hasn't picked up any contaminants, it can pick up diseases. Diseases love water. It helps to move them around. So use that rainwater on your outdoor garden and on your outdoor containers, but we don't really recommend bringing it inside unless you have some way to treat it because we don't know what kind of pathogens might be in it or what it might have picked up running off your roof. There might be some contaminants that come in there. So just in general, we're a little hesitant to recommend that practice. Put it on your garden.
Yeah,
Definitely do that.
great. Here's a couple more specific types of questions here. One is about the holiday cactus. Hasn't bloomed in quite a while. It's in a west window, but does get street light at night. Any suggestions?
Okay. If that street light is really bright and kind of red in color, it could confuse the plant. So as I said earlier, the seasonality is what makes those holiday cactuses bloom. So if you shut the curtains at night, that will help it. Though if you keep your own lights on later, it's red light, red and kind of yellow lights that make it think the day is long. So what it needs are short nights that we get naturally late in the year and cool evening temperatures. So like the best flowering I've seen is if somebody had an unheated porch and they would leave it out there. So give it cool nighttime temperatures. You might between 40 and 50 degrees at night for a few months, and at the same time block light for at least 12 hours. So make sure that it doesn't get that street light bleed from say 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. That will encourage it to flower. You might also try some fertilizer. Maybe it just doesn't have the right nutrients. Like I said, more potassium and more phosphorus to help the plant to flower.
And with fertilizer, so the holiday cactus is trying to bloom at this time of year, but for other plants, you would stop fertilizing for the winter. Is that right?
You can keep fertilizing if you're providing your plants with warm temperatures. So they're still growing. I mean, I wouldn't fertilize my outdoor plants, but your plants are still growing. You might cut back on your fertilizer levels to like half of what you do during the summer.
Okay. And then restart again, kind of when they get maybe in the spring, summertime to restart kind of the full
Yeah,
strength.
when the light comes back and they get more energy for growing.
Great. Let's see here. I'm just looking through the questions. We have a couple more minutes here. Here's one about bringing outdoor plants in. So they have a Rex begonia.
Hmm.
They do great outside in the summer, but when they've brought them in, they kind of wither away. So
Hmm.
recommendations for that one.
Oh, yeah, mine tend to struggle in the winter. Um, the dry air is hard on them. And you also have to be careful how you water them. You don't want to stop watering completely, but if you overwater them and let their roots get chilled and wet, they can pick up a lot of diseases. So try and, oddly enough, keep the leaves more humid and moist and the roots a little bit drier. So that's what I would recommend for those begonias.